Welcome to the Leaders Lab podcast, where we unpack lessons from great leaders across all walks of life and turn them into actionable advice to help you on your own leadership journey. I'm your host, Ken Eslick. Today we have Shelly Shaban coming back. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, Ken. So happy to be here today again.
Yeah, good to see you. And let me give you a proper intro here. So, Sherry is an athletic therapist, osteopath, nutritional consultant, and strength coach. Sherry has over 18 years of experience and has dedicated her life to motivating, inspiring, and empowering thousands of people all over the world to reach their highest potential in health and fitness. You can learn more about Sherry at sherryshaban.com, and we'll put it in the show notes as well. So glad to have you back, Sherry. We had Sherry and I have known each other for a while. We kind of geek out on all this personal development stuff, and we did that on the Leaders Lab podcast back in I think you were on in like July or August, and we really got to hear your amazing story from being an athlete when you were younger to having a horrific accident to then getting knocked out of sports and having to re-identify yourself. And we got into all those, I think, mindset things that you went through back then, Sherry, that have made you stronger, made you who you are now. And you're truly, like, out of the people I know, probably the most athletic, best in shape from a diet perspective, from a physical perspective, out of anybody I know. Like, you're right up there. And so what I wanted to get into on this podcast today is really getting into the meat and potatoes of that. How do you eat like an athlete? And so anyway, welcome back. Let's start there, and then take that wherever you want to. And I really would like to focus on the dietary nutrition side of things today, if possible.
Amazing. Thank you for that warm welcome, Ken. So it's interesting that you talk about diet, and I want to start off by saying that I am actually anti-diet, and it's sort of one of the traits of being an athlete, right? Athletes don't diet and exercise because dieting and exercise means we're really focused on this short-term outcome, right? Like every spring, I submit my taxes, I have that goal. As soon as I hand in my taxes, I stop working on it. And so the athlete is actually a mindset, right? It's not a person who necessarily makes millions of dollars a year practicing their sport, but it's a person who shows up for themselves because they're focused on performance, who choose food that serves them because they're really focused on how they're going to recover post workout or how they're going to sleep or show up for the next workout. And so that really comes from a place of love and a place of identity. And so if anyone's listening today, it's really about how can I start to maybe shift the way that I look at food and look at exercise. And it's not necessarily a punishment for how I look or how I feel about myself, but instead it's really this way of life. Like it's like water, right? It's non-negotiable for me. It's a part of my day to day.
Right. So, and I was getting all the identity things, when you were saying that is so. So then when you're training people, it's more around how do they encompass the mindset, I guess, first of all, of an athlete, and then what would that athlete do in terms of their nutrition? Not, hey, I'm going to diet, because diet it implies, like you're saying, that it's for a little bit, right? It's to lose 10 pounds or whatever. It's not necessarily a lifestyle.
Right. And I think that sort of the basis of that is really how we speak to ourselves. I know we're talking about nutrition, but
Right.
if I'm going to make choices around nutrition that serve me, it's really because I love me, right? It's not, again, that means to release X number of pounds. And that's how an athletic mindset is. And that's how the athlete shows up for him or herself. And so if you think about the majority of the thoughts that we have throughout our day, they're negative, right? And what happens is whenever we have thoughts, it releases neuropeptides, which releases neurotransmitters, which release hormones in certain areas of the body. And then that hormone basically gives rise to a particular emotion. And so, the best way to sort of give that example is, well, what happens when we have a sexual thought, right? We have a sexual thought, and then
I
all of
like
a
where
sudden,
this is going. Cool. All right, stay on it.
keep going, right? Right. But when you think about it this way, just to break it down, we can definitely relate, right? And so we have to think that, well, if I have a sexual thought, certain areas of my body turn on, and then I have other thoughts that, keep me in that loop. And so when I have negative thoughts about myself or self-deprecating thoughts, I'm also turning on that negative loop. And so if you ever hear any athlete speak or describe themselves, they never say, oh, I'm just okay, or I suck, right? They say, I'm the greatest, right? I'm the best. And so that's sort of the first step is when I embrace that identity and I start to make choices out of love, it then becomes a part of who I am. And then I no longer am dieting, right? So for example, I don't drink. And I say I don't drink, and I use the word don't, right? Because it's so absolute, it's who I am. And it
Hmm.
takes me away from that restriction,
Well,
right?
and
If I say,
you're not saying I can't drink. You're not saying I wish I could drink, but I'm not because it's sober October or whatever, right?
right,
It's just
right.
for you, it's off limits because it's not consistent with who you are.
Right, right. And so, I stopped drinking many years ago. I was training for an Ironman, and I noticed that even if I had a little bit, my training was terrible the next day. I didn't feel rested. I didn't feel like I recovered. And so I started to really focus on how things made me feel and not necessarily how many calories are in here and, what does my calorie deficit need to be so that I can get the results that I want. And so that's how the athlete thinks too. They're going to turn down a night of partying if they have an important training session the next day. They're going to sit down with people who are having conversations around what they want to achieve or people who are better than them, right? People who they
Mm.
want to chase. And so that's sort of the first part. Because again, if I'm in that place where I'm constantly restricting and constantly in that diet mindset, then this doesn't become a way of life. And in fact, what we do start seeing is people who engage in many diets or maybe choose certain habits as a means to release weight, they get stuck in this loop of diet culture, diet mindset, which is a scarcity mindset. Then we start to have these disordered patterns with eating, right? And this negative relationship with food in general.
Well, I'm assuming too, if you haven't addressed the identity and the mindset around the identity, you can make progress, right? Like there's millions of people, myself included at one time that said like, I want to lose X amount of weight for this thing or for this event or somebody's high school reunion or whatever it might be for a wedding. And then they do it, but nothing's really changed. So they're just bound to be snapped back, right? Because they were just engaged in something that by nature was temporary. So okay, so but not everybody, listening wants to be an athlete, which I know is going to piss you off because you like I love that you call everyone athletes. I notice
Right.
with all of your everybody that you work out with, everybody that you train, you call everybody's an athlete, which I think is really cool because you're helping to install that in identity with them or for them. But let's take it kind of literal and go, okay, what about the average like entrepreneur that has, in their opinion, limited time? Maybe they're not doing the best job with their health and fitness right now. How do they approach this? And again, not making it a diet, but how do you wrap an identity? Because a lot of people would say, "Oh, well, what you're doing, Ken, is more than I want to do, and certainly what Sherry's doing is more than what I want to do." So, how do you work with them to get something that not only is going to take them where they want to be from a goal perspective, but also fits in with their identity?
Right. Yeah, again, it comes down to language, right? We talked about not using the word can't, right?
Hmm.
Can't is a restriction. Like, I can't work out. I'm so busy. I can't, right? It automatically creates a block for me. And it really shows, again, that restriction, right? And so similarly, when we use the word but, it also creates that obstacle, right? I work, honestly, Ken, I work 60 hours a week. I wish, even though I have a gym in my house and I'm in the health and fitness world, I have so much other stuff going on and I'm a mom, right? So how do I make things work in my schedule? Well, first, I want to make sure that whatever I choose is chosen really based on this space of love, right? I'm going to showing up for myself because I love myself because I'm deserving, and that again, that is the athletic mindset. So if I'm going to make things work out for me, then I have to make it fit my lifestyle. And my workouts don't need to be so long, right? I can do short, intense workouts that fit into my day. Whenever I'm on a call, maybe I'll go for a walk at the same time, or I turn off my camera, I do, a Tabata wall sit. And so when I'm in that place where I'm always going to choose for me and put myself first, then I'm going to make things happen, right? I want to start a business, but I'm a mom creates a block for me, right? I find many reasons not to do it. I'm super busy, the kids need me, I have other responsibilities, I don't have time. But if I say I want to start a business and I'm a mom, I'm going to start looking for solutions, right?
Right.
How can I make this happen? How can I maybe schedule myself around my kids' schedule? Maybe I can take them with me when I do things. Maybe I can do stuff online and then be available for them too, right? So it does have to start with that place because I think you know it, right? Most people, the first excuse is I don't have time. Whatever that is I don't have time, right? Yet we have time to do all these other things. The moment we say I don't have time, we just automatically say, well, this is not a priority to me. There are other things that are more important. And then right away we just dismiss that idea. We don't even entertain that possibility.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. It's like I don't have time. Time is obviously there's a certain number of hours in a day, but normally when you're feeling that way, you're feeling sluggish, you're feeling low energy. A lot of the reasons you're feeling sluggish and low energy is from the lack of nutrition, the lack of exercise. And so, maybe you're putting in the hours, but they're not like that effective, right? Because you're burnt out all the time. And it's this, I've been there. I mean, I've been on both sides of this equation. I mean, I don't know if I told you, but well before I met you, so around I guess when I got out of the army, 30 plus years ago, I weighed about what I weigh right now. I was in good shape. I then proceeded to gain about 2 pounds a year for like 2 decades. You know what I mean? Like just and so did everyone else around me at my age, right? So all of a sudden I went from weighing like 175, 180 to 185 to 108. Just not even something you're going to notice in the mirror. Someone would literally have to like fall off the planet, for 10 years to even come back and see the change, or you'd have to look at really old photos. But one day my brother-in-law asked me if I wanted to run a 5K for charity for this girl that was injured. I don't know if I talked to you about this before, but I was like, yeah, I'll do a 5K, no problem. I'll jump out there. And I couldn't do it, Sherry. Like I couldn't run a 5K. And I got sick, and it was my diet. It was lack of exercise. I mean, it was all of it. All of it was bad. And I got super, super motivated at that point, right? And I got myself running again, and I got myself eating right again. But if you would have asked me in that moment prior to that race, why aren't you doing it? I'd be like, I don't have time to do it, right? I'm raising kids. I'm doing this and that. And it was like, I made time the minute my identity changed. So the minute I realized I couldn't run a consecutive mile, let alone the entire 5K without feeling sick, it was a shock to my system. My blueprint no longer matched my life conditions. And I was like, something's got to change. This is ridiculous, right? And so I went out and I made the time, and somehow, you just find the time, and I think also to your point, if we start looking at it as taking care of ourselves, right? Like this is me time. I get to turn my cell phone off. Not I have to work out. I get to be by myself. And I think the language that we use is so important, because that becomes, sacred time. And we know that we're pouring back into ourselves, and it'll certainly manifest itself in terms of energy and longevity and all of that.
Right, right. And it sounds like that moment became sort of a necessity for you, right? Getting into shape or focusing on your self-care suddenly became a necessity, right? And that's generally, yeah, go
Yeah, I'm
ahead.
sorry. It absolutely, I've had a few moments like that in my life where I was like, this changes now, or I've had it where I've been inspired by something, right? So it's either desperation or inspiration, one of the two. In that case, it was a little of both. It started with desperation and just getting pissed off, like mad at myself, like how did this happen? And then just getting like laser focused. But what's weird is when you get that focused and you get some results early on, then I was already an athlete. Like 3 days into my training, I was now an athlete, because I knew
Right.
exactly, you know what I mean? Because I knew exactly where I was going. I knew exactly what I needed to do. And so everything that was going to happen between that moment and losing 50 pounds was simply just a matter of time. It was a foregone conclusion. It was like, I'm doing this every day. I know how committed to it I am. So there's no way I'm going to slow down. There's no way it's not going to happen. And with that comes, just a whole different identity that kind of spurred out of that.
Right. Yeah, and that's definitely what we have to step into. And sort of coming back to that comment earlier is, I know people listen to this and they're like, I'm not an athlete. What is she talking about? Right? A lot of people I work with, when I start calling them athletes, they start chuckling, like, what do you mean? Me?
Right.
You talking about me? Right? And again, the athlete is about the being, right? It's not just about the action steps, but it's who I am. When I'm on vacation, I have my yoga mat. I'm going to work out. Right? I'm not going to sit in the buffet and miss my workouts. Like no matter where I am, if I'm on the moon, I'm still going to work out. Right? And that's because it's just a part of who I am. And so when I step into this space, again, when I'm really focused on this is how I live out my day, and I focus on my self-care first, because when I focus on me first, it actually helps everyone else around me. right? We have this thing, I think, in our society where we congratulate people when they self-sacrifice, right? You're a really good mom when you self-sacrifice and you're putting yourself last. Like you're congratulations, you're really amazing, right? But you know what? It's actually putting yourself first, doing all the actions, being that role model for your kids that make us a more powerful parent, right? Our kids model us. And so I know that when I have higher energy because I'm taking care of myself, I show up better on, my projects or
Right.
show up better as a mom, right? And so we just have to reframe that a little bit and then start really congratulating ourselves for showing up for ourselves because we're creating that role model that we want our kids to see. And essentially when they grow up and become parents, that's how we want them to live out their lives too, right?
For sure, for sure. Have you noticed? I mean, I noticed this with myself now because now that was 15 years ago when that weight came off, and it stayed off, and so now I know when I'm being inconsistent, with
Hmm.
what I should be doing, and beyond the just physical part of how I feel when I don't exercise or how I feel when I'm not eating the way I should, there's a message that I'm sending to myself. This plays off what you were just talking about when I say through my actions, everything else is more important than me,
Right.
right? Like of all of these 24 hours in a day, everything else took priority over me eating and exercising, even doing some exercise. And one thing I love about what you're talking about is it doesn't have to be hours and hours, and we'll talk about that
No.
in a minute, but like really, I didn't find time to jump on the Peloton for 20 minutes. I couldn't
Right.
hit the gym that's right down the street. I couldn't have chosen or pre-planned in advance to have some green juice and some greens in the fridge instead of a bag of Doritos or whatever. And that message, so hey, we all eat that kind of stuff sometimes, right? Maybe not you, Sherry,
Right.
but but so we're going to be okay, right? We're going to be okay. You can mix in a cheeseburger every now and then. We get that. I think what's worse is what I'm saying to myself. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? I think it's way worse than I'm just saying that everything else is more important than me. And the language I'm telling myself now when I get in there bright and early is, hey, I'm the most important thing in my life, right?
Right.
Like I've got to, this is the hub of my life is my body and my mind. I've got to take care of it. And I think when we start that way, it just bleeds into other things during the day.
Yeah, 100%. And we show up for things that we believe is important, right? Like
Yeah.
if we were going to get paid for something, we show up, right? If it's for other people, we show up. But when it is for ourselves, then, we don't show up. Well, first of all, who's holding us accountable? Right? If I don't show up for me, who cares? Nobody's going to say anything about it. Nobody's going to judge me for it, right? It's just me, myself, and I. And so, to your point, when we do show up for ourselves and we say we are the most important thing and we are the most important person to ourselves, that's the greatest act of self-love, right?
Hmm.
And that's what I've noticed. I keep coming back to the self-love part because I think that is the component that's oftentimes missing. And we go to certain substances. We have addictions, whether that's food or that's alcohol or whatever other substances, because we're looking for some sort of currency of love, right? We're trying to find that pleasurable feeling in something. And so when I have a commitment to myself and I don't show up, I basically tell myself I'm not that important. Like I
Right.
don't have to show up for me. I can show up for everyone else, but I never have to show up for myself.
Right. And that's exactly I'm not saying I never do it or I never skip a day. I'm just clear on that language. And I'm like, I don't want to feel that way because even if I know it and I intellectually, and I also try to be just honest with, it's funny. Tommy Rosen, who was on the podcast last week or last couple of weeks, actually, we did a 2-part episode. I was with him at a yoga retreat one time,
Mhm.
and I wasn't feeling very good physically. My back was hurting, and you know how there's always that need to explain to the teacher like what's wrong with you, and you're a fitness instructor, so like people tell you that all the time, right? The minute they walk in, they'll go, "Oh, I got a bad hip, or my arm hurts, or whatever." We always feel this need to inform everybody why we might not be at our best.
Right.
And I did that. I'm like, hey, I'm not that flexible as it is, and now we're in this class, and he just said, "Hey, Ken," and I said, "Yeah." He's like, you just have an honest practice, meaning don't push too far,
Right.
don't go too easy, like do what's right for me. I know what's right for me, do what's right for me. And I would say that has stuck with me in so many areas now, right? Is just be honest about it to myself. What is right for me today? There's people listening to this that might be in their early 20s, and what's right for them in their lifestyle right now might be working out for an hour a day. That's not what I'm going to do most days right now. I have a couple of days a week where I'll go that hard, but usually for me, it's 20, 30 minutes and then eating right,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, and that's honest, that's a good balance for me, with where I need to be right now. But I think that's been huge.
Yeah.
So let's talk about nutrition for a minute, and then I want to get a little more specific. And you can talk too about your online programs too. I know um, we didn't bring you on here like to sell them or anything, but I'm genuinely curious, and I think our audience will be too, especially with your knowledge in this area. So let's talk about the nutrition side for a minute, and then maybe come back to the two of them together. So when you changed your identity, when you got out of sports, started running with the wrong crowd, and then got back in, right, and really dove in. When you first dove back in, was it primarily on the fitness side, or did nutrition just start with you right away and was part of the package, or did it kind of come along later?
I think it's been just this long journey of constant self-discovery. And I love what you were saying earlier about how when you show up for a workout, it might always look a little bit different. And now you really show up focusing on how you feel that day. And so fitness and nutrition in general are sort of under that same concept, right? So as we pour into a brand new training program, what we want to do is always really focus on how we're feeling that day, knowing that it doesn't always have to be the same. Right? It's, you may have heard about intuitive eating. Well, intuitive training is very, very similar. And when it comes to nutrition, what's really important to pinpoint too is that there's not one diet that fits all. And I think we're on this constant search for that one magical diet, right? And the vegan movement was really big. And when I actually first started getting into the fitness world, it was all about counting calories, and that was how it was done. In fact, I first started getting into bodybuilding. And then that just sort of started evolving until I found what felt right for me. And that was training, right? What felt good for me? What didn't leave me aching for 3, 4, 5 days afterwards? And sometimes that looked like more gentle yoga. And sometimes that looked like just walking. And sometimes it was running. And so it was really a combination of everything. And so I found that sweet spot that just seems to continue to fit. And so, I came back from Costa Rica a couple weeks ago. I haven't been 100% energetically like I normally am. So my workouts are a little bit lower impact right now. And so when we look at nutrition, it's also the same way, right? And we don't necessarily approach things with curiosity anymore. When we were kids, whenever, we were curious about something, or whenever we wanted to discover something, it was always this question of what would happen if I did this? Like, what would happen
Yeah.
if I touched this hot surface? Or what would happen if I tried this, And so for me, nutrition was that sort of evolution. I had constant back pain when I first started working out. It was like this baseline of chronic back pain. And I noticed that as I started changing certain things around my nutrition, then that directly impacted my pain. And so recently, I think this in the last few months, I've removed sugar completely from my diet. And when I say that to people, they're like, "What? You don't eat
I
sugar?"
know. I immediately want to go,
Right?
what does that mean? Like,
What does that
exactly.
mean?
Yeah.
Right? Not even maple syrup or honey, you
Hmm.
know? And I want to also say that I've been at this for 20 some years now, So it wasn't something like, okay, overnight, I'm going to stop this and carbs, but I've
Hmm.
tried a lot of things. And it's just like, walking into a store, trying on a pair of pants, and either it fits you or it doesn't. And so when I stopped sugar, it was a curious question. It was, what would happen if for 28 days I removed sugar? And if nothing happened, Ken, after those 28 days, I would have still continued to consume sugar,
Now,
right?
what did happen?
Oh my gosh, like my sleep got so much better. My energy was so much better. I felt very in control of my mood, even just cognitively, just very sharp mentally.
Can I ask, when you say eliminating sugar, is it added sugars, or is it any, because any sugar would imply even fruit and stuff like that, right? Or is it just added sugar, non-natural sugar?
Right. So any added sugar. So you
Okay.
asked me earlier around my nutrition. I really am, I'm not a, good or bad type person. Like I
Right.
don't believe anything is good or bad, right? And
Right.
I don't think we should ever assign meanings to anything, because when we assign a meaning to something, we also assign an emotion. If I did something good or I ate something that was good, then I'm good. And if I had something that was bad, then I'm bad. And now I feel guilty, I feel ashamed, I feel embarrassed, disappointed in myself. And so I'm just playing around with a whole bunch of things. When I first started training, like I said, I was doing the whole calories thing. And then after a while, I got into the CrossFit world, and then I did the paleo, and then I did the zone, and then I've even tried keto, and then I've been vegan several times in my life. And right now I'm in this place where I want to say I choose intuitively. I do
Hmm.
intermittent fasting because intermittent fasting is not a diet. Intermittent fasting is a pattern of eating that really helps us create space for healing, right? And we can talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But essentially, I've come to this place by just experimenting and by focusing on how I feel. If
Right.
my outcome was always, this is how I want to look, and I probably get asked this almost every single day, how did you get your six pack? Like, I've never actually had a goal to get a six pack, and I've never gone into the gym or trained or ate a certain way
See, if I
with.
were you, my answer to that would be it's not a six pack, it's an eight pack. It's but yeah, but you're doing it and then that's the byproduct of it, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. So what, okay, so let's talk about some staples though. Like if someone's getting one thing ever since I've known you, you've been doing intermittent fasting, and I've spent long chunks of time in intermittent fasting, and I don't know why I don't stay there. I'll share some personal thoughts with you, but or results, and kind of tell you why. But I have so much more energy when I do it.
Yes.
Here's how I look at it, and even at a very baseline level, and so let's talk about intermittent fasting for a second. So intermittent fasting typically is when you just allow all of your calories in during a set number of hours, and that you're pretty consistent with that day in and day out, right? So most people, when they're starting, it might be something like an 8 or a 10 hour window where they eat, right? Something like, for example, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. is when you consume food, and the rest of the time you don't. And the idea around that, there's several things. Number one, you're not going to do a lot of like that late night grazing and snacking and stuff like that. So you're going to naturally, not that that's the goal of intermittent fasting, but you're probably going to get rid of some unwanted calories and some unnecessary calories. But beyond that, I think let's even say that you have a 10-hour feeding window, which is a pretty large one in fasting. Um, you give your digestive system 14 hours to do its job uninterrupted,
Right.
right? And I think we as humans, I mean, when you think about it, like even right now, because I haven't been doing intermittent fasting, if I get hungry at 9 o'clock, I'll grab a protein bar at night. You know what I mean? I'll go to
Right.
bed an hour later. My body has to work to process that. I'll get up in the morning and I'll have a smoothie or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with all this. It's just I notice that I have dramatically more energy when I fast. My issue with it, honestly, is that it worked too well in a way.
Right.
Um, and which means I should probably burn more or eat more calories during my open windows, because I did
Mm,
like the other results, but as you know, I my metabolism just kicked into gear and like
right.
lost a lot of weight.
I remember.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you bring up a really good point, and there are so many ways to do intermittent fasting, right? And so again, I want to just make it clear that intermittent fasting is really a health protocol
Hmm.
with the side effect of releasing weight if you did have excess weight. And
Hmm.
now there are so many different windows, right? So maybe somebody like you can, because you have a high metabolism, you're super active anyway throughout the day, you exercise a lot, you eat super clean. Maybe a 16-hour window might be too aggressive for someone like you, right?
Hmm.
And so the minimum window is 12 hours. And in fact, I actually start off my athletes with 12 hours because
Uh-huh.
at 12 hours, it's comfortable, we can do. And if you think about it, to your point, a lot of us are snacking up until the very last minute. We're watching TV, we're snacking, eating popcorn. It's 11 o'clock at night, we go to bed, we wake up, we eat something, right? And so the body is constantly digesting. And it's so taxing on the body. In fact, it's so energetically draining on the body. And when we break it down and we really focus on hormones, then we start to see the body in two modes. There is fat burning mode, and then there's fat storage mode. And so intermittent fasting puts us in fat burning mode. And it's not just about the physical body or releasing adipose tissue, but it's also about allocating that energy that's constantly used for digestion to actually heal the body. And so this is the process of autophagy, which is like the gift that keeps on giving. Our gut and our immune system are intricately related. So if I'm spending so much time digesting, I'm suppressing my immune system. I'm not giving my immune system enough energy to do its job, which is to go around and to remove damaged cells, to remove cells that are mutating that could cause disease, right? Or to help reduce inflammation in the body. And so we can start to look at it this way. And again, we spoke about nutrition earlier and talked about how oftentimes our diet is just the means of releasing weight. Well, intermittent fasting is not a diet. And if I start looking at it as, you know what, I love myself, I'm doing this for myself, it's giving my body an opportunity to heal itself, I'm able to balance my hormones and put myself in fat storage mode, then it becomes, again, a lot easier of a commitment to keep up with, right? And so every time we eat, whenever we eat carbohydrates or whenever we eat protein also, we release insulin. And so insulin is released from the pancreas. And you may have heard how insulin is required for diabetics, right? So a person who is a diabetic has exhausted their pancreas because there's constant stimulation of the pancreas to release insulin because there's so much sugar. Or if that person was born this way, let's say type 1 diabetes, then that also requires a supplement of insulin. But every time insulin is released, its job is to store. It is the storage hormone. And so it goes in the bloodstream, it collects all the blood sugar, and then brings it to the muscle for storage as glycogen, brings it to the liver for storage as glycogen. The liver and the glycogen can be stored a little bit higher, so the liver has higher capacity to store glycogen. And then everything else is converted into fat and stored in the adipose tissue. Now, the other job of insulin, because it's a storage hormone, and it makes absolutely no sense that if the body's in storage mode, that it's also releasing stored energy. The second job of insulin is then to suppress release of fats from the fat cells, from the adipose tissue. So if I understand this, every time I eat sugar or every time I eat high protein, I'm releasing insulin and I'm putting myself in storage mode, then by putting myself in that fasted state, I now start to call upon that stored energy. That stored energy is used when we're training. So if I'm working out, I'm using the glycogen in my muscle and then eventually the glycogen in my liver. But then when my body starts to run out of that, or I'm working at, let's say, a low aerobic state, I start to release the fats that are stored in the fat cells and use that as energy. But if I've been constantly conditioning my body to rely on glycogen, to rely on glucose all the time for energy, I don't have the hormones required at the moment in high amounts to pull out that fat from the fat cells. And so a lot of us starting intermittent fasting are having a hard time because we actually don't have that machinery to do it. And so the more we commit to it and then we adapt to it, slowly starting maybe from 12 hours to maybe upping it to 15, 16 hours, whatever feels right for us, whatever is something that's sustainable for us, we start to upregulate the expression of these hormones. So the genes are now starting to express these hormones. And after a while, we become fat adapted. And we're able then to go for long periods of time without getting hangry, without shaking, without feeling that low blood sugar or that hypoglycemia, and start to really feel comfortable and reap the benefits of intermittent fasting.
I definitely thank you for that explanation. That helps so much. It makes sense on so many levels because it's like, if you're not doing that and you're not in that pattern, then it's almost like you always need these quick hits, right? Of food or sugar or whatever. And that's the people where you go, didn't you just eat like a couple hours ago? And they're like, I'm dying, like I'm freaking out. And you're like, just be calm. But they can't really, their body's just like asking for it because it's addicted to it, right? They need the hit. Then on the flip side, for me personally, when I dropped all that weight and really almost like once I got into it, almost couldn't stop. I think it was because I was in that pattern where I just wasn't hungry all the time. If anything, I got more active and I was already active. I was already active enough to offset my bad nutritional habits before I went in, you know what I mean? So I actually got even more active on top of that. So did more cardio,
Right.
shorter windows. And so it all kind of makes sense. It'll be nice to get there again, knowing what I've learned from you, because I'll be able to go like, okay, very simple. I want to stay within a certain, whether it's weight, body fat, whatever, but I can just be more conscious about the nutrition I'm putting in. So if someone's just getting started, let's say they're like, man, I'm listening to this and I got to get something going, right? They're me from when I had to get Emma's run when I couldn't do my 5K, right? So who shouldn't do intermittent fasting? Because it's challenging for like diabetics and stuff like that without like doctor's advice. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's now a tool that is recommended for diabetics, but really great question because anybody who had, let's say, past experience of a binge eating disorder or another eating disorder or disordered eating, then it may not be the right step for them. Maybe the first step would be to overcome or maybe make peace with food first and then
Hmm.
to start intermittent fasting. So what could happen is because there's a restriction in certain time of eating, that it could trigger a binge eating pattern or sort of any past history of an eating disorder. So it's generally for anyone around that. And again, it's starting small. And the same thing with exercise, right? We always talk about consistency first. And so before I would even change what I ate, I would just maybe master these windows, because by just focusing on the windows, I will already have an impact. There will already be a result from that. And then let things slowly happen over time. Well, what would happen if, I started eating less processed food? What would happen if I stopped eating after 8 p.m.? What would happen if I started having more water? What would happen if, I drank less coffee, right? And just really small habits, small changes. And with that hyper focus on sustainability. If I can't keep something up past 28 days or it doesn't feel right for me or it feels super restrictive, then maybe I have to try something else,
Right.
right? There's not a one way that fits all. For some people, they thrive on a vegan diet, right? That I wasn't the case. I actually didn't feel well on a vegan diet. I had massive gut health issues after doing that. So I know that that's not 100% for me, right? And the same thing with exercise, focusing on consistency first, showing up for 2 minutes, even if that means really for 2 minutes I did sit squats. That means I sat on my
Right.
chair and I stood up for 2 minutes and started there and build that muscle of habit. Because when I have that habit and it becomes an essential part of my schedule, an essential part of who I am, I can start to build up on that. And then
Perfect.
thinking that there is no deadline around this, right? There is no time restriction. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And I truly believe that as we age, we become fitter. Because right now I'm 42 and I've been training regularly for 22 years, right? Compared to 10 years ago when it was only 12 years, right? And that really happened because I had to be flexible and I had to be adaptable. I've injured myself so many times. I've had surgery on my back twice. I've had 2 kids. Last year I tore my calf muscle. Like it's been a constant sort of roller coaster, right? And I just mentioned I was in Costa Rica for a couple weeks. I was assisting in a yoga teacher training, and I joined everyone at breakfast. Normally, I would eat actually later in the day. In Montreal, I eat after 3 p.m., right? But because I was in that environment and I want to sit down with everyone and have breakfast and have lunch and have dinner, it's not rigid, right?
Right.
Anything that's rigid is a diet, and that's not something that I can keep up, right?
One thing that I've really noticed about you, and I like this a lot about your take, is it's even though you're coming from a position of expertise, it's never like you said, it's never right or wrong. It's never really yes or no. It's flexible. You're not telling people what to do. You're not judging what they're doing. People are different. Vegan diet didn't work for you. It might work wonderfully for someone else, right? 20 minutes of exercise might be great for a person with this set of goals and not enough or too much for this other person, right? So everybody's different. Tell me about your online programs, especially kind of the ones that I think might apply to the executives, the people that need quick hit workouts. And do you combine those with like fitness? I'm sorry, do you combine those with like nutritional information and recipes and things like that?
Yeah, so I mean, I have sort of different programs depending on what the person's looking for. First step is maybe access my YouTube channel and just learn a little bit about my style. And all the workouts are between 6 and 12 minutes long. And then I have other coaching programs. So I have small programs that are 28 days long. It's sort of a do it on your own. I have an advanced power group. This is an all women's group, and we meet once a week for coaching. We talk for about 2 hours, and then they follow my workouts. And again, I'm not all about the nutrition nutrition plans, but instead it's about implementing one habit at a time. And just recently, I launched, this is like, has a very special place in my heart, something I wanted to launch for a long time. It's called Making Peace with Food. And I'm working with athletes who have sort of a tendency of out of control eating. And out of control eating could be the binge eating. It could be I'm full, I'm not hungry yet. I smelled food. I'm still going for it. And it actually, the underlying cause for that is around emotion and managing emotion. So it's very special. And I just want to say that, really fitness is possible for everyone.
Hmm.
And it comes from a place of love. And I unfortunately have seen that, especially in the health and fitness world, or if you're following someone on social media, there's this constant space of comparison, right? All we do is compare ourselves with others, or we feel like whatever we're doing is not good enough. And when we do go to the gym, or when we do finally start showing up for ourselves, there's still that voice in our head that's constantly telling us that it's not enough. And the
Right.
moment we can overcome that voice and start celebrating every small thing that we do for ourselves, that's really where the door opens wide and we start to stack these habits. And before we know it, we're a completely different person than when we started.
Such a good point. I love that. And I'm going to add to it that anybody trying to jump into this world, and depending on where you're at, like let's just say someone is again where I was 15, 16 years ago, and if you're motivated to do more and you've been there before, then great. But if you're sort of new to some of these concepts, just tread lightly, because again, it's you're trying to make a identity shift, a lifetime switch, like Sherry's saying. And I mean, the biggest way to kill ever going back to the gym again is like wiping yourself out on the first day. And so I see more people like going out for 5 mile runs that haven't ran in forever, and then they're just torn up the next day, or making your food situation so prohibitive that no one can stick to it because again, you haven't trained into that either. And now you've just gotten rid of all of your favorite foods and there's nothing to eat in the house anymore, and you're not really ready for that. And so it's the small stuff like Sherry's saying, do make a commitment to take the stairs at work, make a commitment to do Sherry's YouTube videos for free to even see if that's something you might be interested in, a couple of those a day or one a day. Um, Look at the cupboards in your kitchen and just decide whether, Oreos and Haagen-Dazs are something that should be permanent fixtures in the house, or maybe just something that you go out and treat yourself to every once in a while, right? Like, so it's not about abstinence. It's not about never having fun. I think it's just more about, being thoughtful about it. And again, putting yourself first. So thank you so much, Sherry. This is great info.
Thank you, Ken. So well said as
Yeah.
well.
Thanks. Love having you here, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us in the Leaders Lab. Please do me a favor and follow the show. Leave us a rating if you'd like, and we'll see you next week in the Leaders Lab. Thanks so much, Sherry.
Thank you, Ken.
All right.